thanks everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to be able to talk this morning. It would have been much more fun to be in a room together somewhere in Europe, Vienna, Frankfurt. But I imagine that we're all in our little attics and lofts and offices at home talking in these exceptional times. I'm the Innovation and Partnerships Manager for the National Institute of Health Research in the UK, and I've been working in technology and mobile. So I've lined up a little bit of a presentation. So would you like me to go ahead now?
Dr. Mark, if you want to say any words prior to...
No, I think that's fine. Please go ahead, Mick. Sorry, I called you Mike earlier, and I just see you're called Mick, so I do apologise for that. But please go ahead.
Yeah, no worries, Mark. There is a difference if you're a Mick. So, right, I've got a few slides, so I'll share my screen and we'll run through those. So, as I've mentioned, my name is Mick Mullane from the National Institute of Health Research, and what we're going to do is look at some of the work we've been doing in the NIHR around possible futures for trials, especially data, COVID, and in relation to the patient and some of those technological changes that are happening in all our lives and cultural changes that have happened in all our lives. But also, I'm quite happy to receive questions and feedback as we go through the presentation. So it's always more difficult when you're just online, but just shout up or raise a hand. So, of course, we're going to deal with life before COVID, during COVID, and kind of post-COVID, what those worlds look like. So with anything that looks at possible futures, the best way to kick off is by going back into the past and looking at a little bit of nostalgia. So back in 2010, the first true smartphone was launched. There were smartphones before then. I think a few of us older types in the audience might remember phones with lots of little buttons and styluses and things like that. But they're only really adopted by us geeky types. And it wasn't until 2010 that the whole kind of scene changed and this technology became so much more user-friendly that it started to become universal. So that was 2010. It's 11 years ago now, and we've seen this enormous leap in the sorts of technologies about. And I know that there's going to be a talk later on about things like digital biomarkers. So things like the Apple Watch can do things like blood oximetry, heart rate, exercise levels, those sorts of amazing things. And you can imagine in a COVID world, being able to track things like blood oxygen levels on a regular basis, not only could give you a heads up to possible infection, but could share data, sort of population data, on how the nation is doing, combined with things like clinical records. So, seeing this massive change in the data that we can collect, and also its accuracy and equivalency, which is an area where we have difficulty within clinical research. We want to make sure that these, what are seen as consumer devices, can actually work in a clinical research environment. So on our journey in the NIHR to sort of see how we can inculcate these sorts of technologies, we actually built, I think it was the first, certainly in the UK, mobile clinical research app. When I say clinical research, it was more research about research. It was a footstep counter with some questionnaire data at either end. So it's nothing special, but it was an app that ran on a device. And we basically asked our own staff to take part. They downloaded the app, answered a questionnaire about how they felt kind of accepted a challenge to kind of walk 10,000 steps a day, and did that. And then at the end of the process, signed and did another kind of patient reported outcome, if you like, a little online survey. But the key thing was about the collection of data, and how the patient themselves could be put in control of the data they wanted to share from their device. And that was collected in a secure manner. It didn't go up to the cloud. It didn't go back to Apple or Google or any of the main players. It came back to us, to a university that hosted the secure data. But it showed to us that clinical trials, the nature of them were changing, and we could actually put the patient in the driving seat in terms of their participation, their consent, and the use of their data. So our journey started back in 2014, 2015 with things like that. We then decided that we needed a wider piece of work to work with patients on the ground and doctors on how they might contribute data via mobile devices. And so this is my original sketch for a project called We've Got Your Back, which was done with a company called Umotif, who built the app, a company called IQVIA, who are a very large clinical research company based in the United States, and another company called EMIS that provide about 50% of the market share of UK-based primary care systems, and us in the National Institute of Health Research that facilitated the research to happen. So there's my original diagram of, patient talks to researcher, decides to sign up, gets the app, and contributes their data. So this is the actual, the one we put in the paper, so it's a little bit more professional. However, how it worked was if someone in a GP surgery, when they met their primary healthcare doctor, if they met the conditions to take part in research, the GP got a little pop-up that said, would you like to take part in a piece of research? And it gave them the ability to prescribe an app, which is pretty radical in the sort of first instance, as we can see that there are different digital therapeutics that are coming along, the ability to track symptoms, to change lifestyle. So this was a sort of the first time that a doctor would be able to kind of say to a patient, would you like to take part in research, and prescribe the app to the patient. The patient then recorded their symptoms. A very simple app that kind of gave you a kind of graduated choice of how you felt today. But also what was key within there was the patient was asked if they would like to combine their research data with their clinical record. You can see that this would present a complete change for how clinical research is conducted, in that you could take the clinical research and link it to the patient themselves, so that you get an immense sort of depth of knowledge coming through there. So that got me thinking about the sort of the current landscape. Okay, so has anyone heard of 23andMe out there? Okay, so it's a company that will profile your genetic profile, and it's been used for these kind of fun things like, am I part Viking or part Egyptian, or and so it's been seen as a fairly lightweight thing to do. However, 23andMe ended up building up an enormous genomic database with information on people, and offered that to the research community, but also said to the person who was part of 23andMe, who'd had the service done, would you like to donate that genomic data for clinical research? And about 80% of participants said yes. And it did help that 23andMe gave them, I think, $120 to take part. So you can already see that people are starting to monetize their data. The other thing that came along that made me start to think was GDPR. These are European regulations on your data, and they basically mean that no matter where your data is or how it's collected, it is your data. It belongs to you. So you can start to see that the individual is thinking about the clinical data that they have and the power. And for us technical types, there's also another movement worldwide of something called FHIR, and it stands for Fast Health Interoperability Resources. And that basically gives us the ability to exchange clinical data between different systems. And that becomes quite powerful when it comes to things like collecting health data. And it's, I think it's a real marker that for things like digital biomarkers that companies like Apple have made sure that their devices work in FHIR, so the data collected is interoperable with other systems. And to give an inkling of what's going on in the background, this was slid out by Apple with not much fanfare. So the sort of the code is on the top left. So at first glance you think it doesn't really mean anything, but what this healthcare record API does is give your smartphone in your pocket the ability to connect to your own health record, so that you can keep your things like what you're allergic to, what medication that you're on, and perhaps more poignant now is you could keep your immunization record or even your vaccination record on there. And I'll show you later that that's how it's done in the UK with the NHS app. So you can see that we're starting to create this interconnected world where the patient has access to their own healthcare record and can contribute to that record. So, what are the implications for research? So it's just a small thing out there that points to where we might be going. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but basically it led me to think that, here am I with my genetic data from 23andMe, with my lifestyle data from things like an Apple Watch, that can collect digital biomarkers. It knows my blood oximetry, my heart rate. I think from anyone with a clinical or even an athletics or sports-minded background will know if they track their heart rate that just before they come down with something nasty, their heart rate tends to go up. So their resting heart rate first in the morning starts to increase a little bit as the body gets ready to fight off incoming viruses. And you think, wouldn't that be amazing to know as a nation when things are starting to sort of pre-step up before you test positive for any nasty viruses like COVID? You can see that we've got traditional data systems, so the records that are held centrally at a hospital or the records that are held by your general practitioner. And we've also got the ability to combine that now with research data. And I, as a patient participant, have the ability to donate that data, either for just altruistic reasons. I could sort of donate that to curetheworld.com, or I could perhaps monetize my own data to take part in research. But either way, I am in control of where that data goes to. Now, this is not radical or difficult, and it is happening in the United States. There's a project called Sync for Science, and it's a very good project, and it doesn't pull any punches. It asks people to donate their complete electronic health record. and they've got something like 500,000 people who have done that and are able then to do some of those virtual trials, some of that big data lake sifting through there to see what turns up. And I think for us, there's some interesting questions in there about control of the data for the patient, what it means for big public health clinical research and science. And, if we look at how we can combine that with some of those digital services and other lifestyle factors, there may be elements in there where we enter into a sort of new era of research involving the patient. So let's have a look at some of that's before COVID. That was some of the things we were working on before COVID. Then the world changed, and it was one of those things where you kind of keep an eye on the news about these things when there's a new cough or respiratory condition found in the Middle East or China, and you think, I wonder if this is the one. And I think late 2019, when reports coming through of a mysterious respiratory condition, I thought, I wonder if this is the one. And then all of a sudden, bang, it hits us. So how did we respond to some of those challenges, and how could we use some of these sort of innovative and technological ways to kind of respond to COVID? The first thing we knew is we need information. And it was a very difficult time to collect information, but there's enormous amounts of things that are out there. And that showed us that, we needed a coordinated approach to how we collected information. And as we're already on with developing vaccines that could be pivoted towards COVID, how could we bring people in to volunteer to take part in vaccine research? So we also had to look at our regulations on patient data. So there's a very strong thread of patient involvement in this conference, which is fantastic. So how could we work with the patient, and what did we need to do as a nation? So emergency legislation was brought in to kind of be able to analyze patient data. And the NIHR itself worked with NHS Digital and NHS X and NHS England and NHS Scotland to be able to produce a register where you could sign up to take part in coronavirus vaccine studies. So we got 500,000 people to take part in those studies, so we could prove the efficacy and, moreover, the safety of the UK vaccine approach. And so that was a big part of involving the public to sign up and take part in research. So then we move on to some of the interesting things about what might happen after COVID, and some of the digital trends that we've seen have been accelerated by COVID. So just like now, when we're all communicating through our laptops, through different devices, we are distributed across Europe. We now realize that patients and doctors can avail themselves of such technology, that research that might have happened in one specialist clinical area might be able to be devolved around the country, around the continent, around the world. So COVID has had an impact on how we conduct and has acted as a technological accelerator to how we conduct clinical trials. So once again, a little bit of a busy slide here, and it's kind of intended for a UK audience. One of the advantages we have in the UK is that we have a unique patient identifier for everyone in the health service. We don't run the same systems in each hospital or health trust, or even a primary care system. We have different systems in Scotland, England, and Wales, and Northern Ireland, the home nations that make up the UK. But the thing that we do have is that unique identifier for each participant. Now, if we can encourage people to kind of know their identifier and to use a government digital service log-on, which has now been called NHS login. If we have that individual, then we can start to glue different things together. And some of the exciting things for us are the use of research consents, so that, previously when we are looking at trying to recruit people into research, we would rely on a sort of scanning of a clinical record when we meet the patient. But if I was affected by a particular ailment, or I was interested in research in a particular way, I could flag up nationally that, I'm interested in taking part in research on this. And that way we get away from that kind of regionalized center, and we open up a research opportunity for all. And then we can also then say, this person is available for research. We can use artificial intelligence, which is the little brain icon at the bottom. Artificial intelligence and things to match different conditions to different pieces of research that are happening in the UK, so the right person gets onto the right piece of research. And we can also combine that in with a participation record. I'm taking part in this research. I need to be thanked for taking part in research, but I also need to inform my physician in case there's any contraindication or contra things that I shouldn't do while I'm taking part in research. So it adds to patient safety. And of course, we can also start to pile in things like lifestyle data. Many people with diabetes will track their diabetes accurately using technology, and they'll be able to share those things through. So there's this vision of this connected research world. But once again, the patient and participant experience is key to that. And, we can look at some of the things we're working on the NHR. If I would like to contribute my clinical data, I have the facility to do that, but I also have the facility to say yes or no, to put me in control. And the COVID situation has accelerated the take up of people looking at their own health record in the UK, because we have things now about like the NHS App, which will show me my health record and will show me my vaccine status. So all of a sudden, when you needed to show your vaccine status to be able to travel outside the UK, if you wanted to get some sunshine, and if you're in the UK today, you'd know that, we get quite desperate for some sunshine. If we wanted to travel to somewhere in Europe, we would have to show our vaccine status. So the uptake of the NHS App is now into the millions as people look at their own healthcare data. So we've got the ability to connect research to that presence so that it becomes part of the overall healthcare journey. And, we should be able to see things like, so here's, I donate my blood for free, and I get a little thank you for taking part with those blood donations. And I think in our whole lives, as we, book flights, buy things online, we're used to an experience where we can interact, and COVID has acted as an accelerator to that. So it is not just people who are technologically switched on. Lots of members of the ordinary public, regardless of age, are taking care of their own healthcare using a lot of these opportunities facilitated by the technology. So that's it. My presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's brought up a few things that might act as a stimulus for the rest of the meeting. I think there's many things looking through the agenda. There's fantastic emphasis on patient involvement. There is emphasis on digital biomarkers. There's emphasis on how different things might function in the future within this new world. So we've got a question come in by Cheryl Caswell. What are your thoughts on the negative public response to the kind of taking of UK health data? Well, Cheryl, my response is that the approach is completely wrong. the approach. So for any of our European partners who are not aware, it was proposed by the UK government that we just take people's healthcare data and stick it in a pot for research without really telling them about it. Now, they said it would be anonymized, but you can only anonymize things so far when you have things like your postal code, area address, your ethnicity, and so I don't believe it's a smart way of doing it, and I think there's a different way of doing it. I think we've seen with some of the technology involved that we can actually ask for permission for its use, and if we gain permission for its use, then when the data is used, we can actually go back and tell the patient where it was used. So I would rather say, yeah, take my data. I'm quite happy with it. Use it for whatever research. And I'd like the feedback that, UK government has used my healthcare data to inform the response to this pandemic. Thank you for its use. Most people in the UK are very happy to donate their NHS data for the benefits of research, but they're not so happy to give their data away to a company that might monetize it. So there's a real thing in the UK about, are people going to make money out of my data or not? So that's my approach, Cheryl, which is, really, we should ask nicely for permission. And I think we would get a far better data set with the right set of permissions, even though it might be smaller. I still think it'd be very valuable.
Any more questions there coming through the chat, or I guess everyone has to ask a question through chat. Is that right, Sam?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I can't see another question, so I've got one brief question, Mick, if that's okay, before we move on to the next speaker. As a UK resident myself, I mean, you touched on the big issue. One of the big issues that I perceive it is the interoperability of the different systems, and of course, the NHS, is a large organisation. I still think it runs a single payroll system, or somebody told me, of 1.6 million people. Yet you've got all of these different bits of data sitting in different hospital trusts, and is there any way of increasing the integration of those so you can power things up, or is that a sort of just an aspiration rather than the practical reality?
No, I think the practical reality is, Mark, is that we've tended to think about things in a slightly older way, which is like, right, I must take the stuff from this hospital, I must take the stuff from this hospital, and I must glue it all together and puddle it into one great big place. And we don't have to do that. So the use of standard data sets like FHIR, which all EHRs have to abide by, means that if we think about things slightly differently, if we know the individual because we have that individual NHS number, we're working on an individual research identifier. So each piece of research will have its own unique identifier. And then what we do is we let that individual number then navigate different systems, and so that we gather the data when we need it for analysis, instead of having a giant great bucket of stuff that we look at. We then ask the patient, is it okay to look at your data? And then we can thread through to gather that, and moreover pull that data into a safe space for its use. That's I think that's the key thing. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom, even though it's massive data sets and things. One of the biggest problems is information governance. And I see technology giving us the ability to talk to the patient directly. So you can say, hey, Mick, Leicester Hospital want to do research on 50-year-old blokes that have a dog. Can we use your data? And I can say yes. So it's about acting as a broker between the data sets, Mark.
Very helpful. Thank you. Well, I think that takes us very nicely on to our next speaker. But unless there are any more questions, thank you very much, Mick, and hopefully you'll be involved with the conference to ask some more questions back to the other speakers. But thank you very much.
Thank you. We got one comment from Dr. Mercy in the Discuss tab. He says, classic ways to find sites that will thereafter find the right patients for your trial With current progress, AI included, would this change to find first patients and see then where you can open the nearest site to cover those patients, or decentralized trials, which will make patient selection CTs sort of site independent? I appreciate your feedback on the above.
I think I've seen the question. I think it's going to be a combination, and a lot of that will depend on the technology involved in the trial. I think we'll see decentralized trials because we now have the ability to collect data in a decentralized way. So, for instance, different people that use the Libra Active diabetes monitor all over the UK, we could collect that data and look at blood sugar and health and location. Does where you live have an impact on that? So you could decentralize a trial using that technology. But once again, you can also use the AI to say, hey, we've got a cluster here. That's where the research ought to go. So a colleague of mine has done a lot of work on that. So we found out that most diabetes research takes part in Cambridgeshire, which is a leafy, affluent part of the UK with lots of very intelligent people who settle there. And obviously they're smart. They want to do the research near where their university is. The problem with diabetes is biggest in the northwest of England, where you've got a higher ethnic minority population. You've got more difficult living conditions. And so that's where the research ought to happen. So I think it'll be a combination. We can decentralize some of these trials, but we can also focus in on where the research is needed. So a good observation, a good question.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I've now realised there's two boxes. There's a discuss box and a Q&A box. Sam, just so everybody does the right thing, which one should people use? Should it be Q&A or discussion, or do we just use both?
Preferably Q&A, but I'll be checking both tabs in case. And thank you again, Mick, for your presentation. I guess we can all head over to the next speakers.
Thank you very much.